What do you see in the future for the industry that is now so highly connected and so distributed?
Supply chain presents such an interesting observation for technology as different technologies develop in the cloud. I think it's going to completely change the ball game in terms of what time to value you can get.
This is the Nutanix Cloud Interlock podcast with your host, Michael Carr.
Welcome to Nutanix Cloud Interlock. This is episode number 1. For those of you joining us, this is the place to be if you're looking for all things cloud related, cloud economics, hybrid cloud use cases, the fastest way to accelerate into cloud. You're going to hear about it here from the team. Nutanix recently interviewed over 125 customers as part of our Customer Insights survey, and we found that there are some clear top concerns and pain points across the enterprises globally. Time to value. We speak about the requirement for ROI and TCO as customers adopt cloud. It needs to make sense and they need to move at velocity. The other one was incompatibility between platforms and a lack of visibility for the operational teams that run it. So disperse workloads running in the cloud, running on-prem, running at the edge. To discuss the topics in today's episode, I have someone that I admire very much, a personal friend and ex-colleague of mine from AWS, Anna Greene. Anna, thank you very much for joining me.
Michael, I am delighted to be here.
And for those of you that don't know, Anna is a proven C-suite executive over 3 different industries in global organizations and has proven track record across technology, finance, and now moving into the logistics and supply chain. Anna, you have been a leader now from a customer perspective with cloud and with on-premises workloads. You've also been a leader in a cloud provider space. With the adoption growing, obviously significantly over COVID, but over the last few years, what have you seen around customer expectations with their cloud journey?
Look, I've had an interesting journey. You know, I started in banking as a risk executive and also then as a CEO. And then I moved to AWS to run one of their businesses across the region. And the reason I did that was because I could see where technology was going in terms of disrupting the customer experience. And even if I reflect on my journey 5 years ago landing at AWS, the conversation around what the customer expects with their technology has completely changed and just keeps changing at pace. So when I first landed at AWS, we were talking about the lift and shift conversation, I guess. Yep. One of those really kind of simple, how do you get and migrate to the cloud and what's the cost imperative and tell us about the operational expenditure versus CapEx. Yep. Really kind of simple cloud economics conversations. What you now see is that your customer is far more educated around the opportunity for technology to change their business model. So it's not just about how do I migrate my services to the cloud, it's how can I get a value add from the change from on-premises to the cloud. So really interesting observations there, and certainly in supply chain, it's a legacy industry, right?
Yeah.
So, they're asking questions about just that basic, how do I save money to migrate? But then they're also saying, but there's all this other stuff happening in technology. How can I implement that into my business model and change the way that I do business? Yeah,
and I think the other thing we've seen was we shifted away from that, what am I going to save money operationally or for infrastructure-wise by moving into the cloud? We saw that move into as well as a productivity shift. So what are the productivity gains I'm going to get from having my workloads running in cloud as opposed to running in a DC? So and I think from a logistical and supply chain perspective, that's definitely something that you would be touching on. Is that really in your mind at the moment as you look at cloud adoption and what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of that and more. So what we were thinking about or talking about 4.5 years ago was, if you're looking at an on-premises migration, you're looking at, in a lot of instances for big enterprises, a spaghetti architecture that nobody can unwind, right? So you're having those difficult conversations around why would we move to the cloud? Yeah. But at that time, the conversation was, look, it's gonna save you money, and we can show you that. And there's a lot of economics that can speak to that. But where you're seeing the conversation shift now is not, it can't just save me money. It also has to improve my operational efficiency. I want to understand what is the the upside for my business model. But actually what I've got to do to keep up with my competitors is make sure that I'm building systems and processes that truly make me best in class for my customers.
Yeah. And I think obviously now in a like supply chain and logistics organization, you're seeing workloads at cloud, in core, at edge, and you probably add a different element that most other organizations don't have, which is in transit. So real-time tracking and things like that, which I think adds another element of complexity to what you're trying to do from a technology perspective.
Definitely. And it's where cloud technology really makes a difference for supply chain and logistics, because that real-time interface can happen now. Whereas, 4 or 5 years ago, you had a very different motion. But the more relevant conversation is, look, how is the technology you're implementing going to help me bring my business forward? So the immediacy of being able to have access to data in the cloud helps your customer to get information about where their package is, for instance, more quickly.
Yep.
So use cases that are relevant, I cannot stress enough how important it is that when you're having a conversation about technology, you can bring to bear use cases that are relevant in an industry context. And typically that's where you'll get people leaning in and being interested in what you have to offer and what there is to learn.
Can you tell us a bit about some of the major pain points you've seen customers face when they're starting out in the process of their cloud migration?
I think the answer to that is where the customer is in their cloud digital journey. Yeah. So what you would observe for a small to medium enterprise, depending if they're in a traditional industry or if they are tech savvy, they're going to be concerned initially about keeping the lights on, right? So it's their business. Yeah. If they are looking to migrate and you're taking away their core capability to go to market or their core operational outcome, that they're simply not going to do the migration. They're just simply not. The risk is too high. Yeah. So getting them feeling comfortable using really solid partners, using really solid, well understood pathways to help those small to medium enterprise customers to migrate, if necessary, I think is probably the biggest pain point for that cohort. Yeah. And then if you have a look at an enterprise, very different conversation. I remember when I was working at ANZ, we had over 200 different systems and processes that all link together through really complex networks. If you're asking a CTO to re-architect a portion of that, you've got to be really careful about how you're going to make sure that you don't shut the whole place down. I have been and seen examples where that has happened, not because people weren't trying, but they just hadn't built, a roadmap or a pathway to making sure that you had consistent uptime and consistent business continuity processes mapped in what it was that you were doing. But again, enterprise is also going to be a different conversation around cost. So they may necessarily have a different point of view on how much they're able to cost and how to phase that. So I guess the answer to that is it depends who your customer is and where they are. But largely, it's going to be time to value. It's going to be show me cost, but also please don't let my whole operation/business shut down while you take me on this exciting journey. Yeah.
It's a very exciting journey. Except
it is an exciting journey,
the bank.
but there are lots of ways that it can go wrong. So just being that trusted partner.
Leading on from that one, Anna, you have the most perfect background to answer the next question, which I think everybody is facing, especially around the enterprise, which is how do I balance the cost and risk versus the perceived benefits and productivity gains that I'm going to get out of going to the cloud? What's your thought as a former risk, as a risk person and someone from FSI, and again now even in your current role, if we take trucks off the road, it's the business is shut down. So how do you help find that?
I'll answer that first. I think you've got to have a senior leader who owns the narrative. You've got to convince that CEO or that senior leader who wants to go on that digital journey, that the reason that they are doing it aligns with what it is that they are trying to achieve in the business. So, when you're speaking to that customer proposition, you're asking not simply the person who's responsible for architecting a technology roadmap, you're asking the business. Yeah. Why would you do this? And you're giving the business an answer and you're saying, the reason you're going to do this is, yes, I'm going to show you a a material reduction in your cost to operate. You will take this out of CapEx. We're putting it into OpEx. It's a conversation that any responsible business leader who's owning a P&L will want to get involved in. But the upside that you will have with your teams, with your business, your ability to disrupt is tangible once you get onto a cloud service platform. And that is true simply because what we see in business now is that businesses are some of the businesses that I've observed are so far advanced in this journey that not only are they, actively building propositions in the cloud, they're also building their own SaaS solutions internally.
Yeah.
So they've invested, they understand it's something that they really have bought into. But then I might pivot and answer that question as a risk executive.
Okay, yes.
As a former chief risk officer,
Yes.
I can tell you that if you tell me that I'm going to architect a solution for you, let's bring it onto the cloud, it'll be much more secure, there'll be data that you'll be able to have native security on, it's the best security in town, but we are going to have this, 2 years or so of potential challenges around getting to that solution. I will say to you,
Go away.
go and talk to someone else about it, because that is a risk I'm not willing to take.
Yeah.
Because my job is to protect the license of in that instance, it would be the bank or whoever, whichever regulated industry you're dealing with, to be able to have a license to serve and operate. So what I would say is that not only do you have to be aware of what the business owner is going to say when you talk to them about cloud migration, you've also got to understand who is the risk person who's going to say, that's too risky for me, which means if you're dealing in FSI, for instance, you have to understand the regulatory risks associated with what it is that you are going to implement.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. It takes me somewhere I wasn't intending to go, which was one thing that I'm seeing changing really rapidly is around government's ability to understand cloud workloads now. So 6 years ago, if a bank said they're putting some workloads in the cloud, or someone with customer data, we'll just say, rather than a poor banking customer again, I've got customer workloads in the cloud. So typically that would not sit well and say, well, they can't go in the cloud. I think governments are now saying, well, the cloud's robust, it's secure if it's done well. So we can regulate and say, well, you can have it if you're meeting these requirements. But now we're also seeing them, I think, pivot away and say, you can't just have all your eggs in one basket. And one thing we've been noticing a lot is that, okay, well, I've gone all in on a cloud provider. I now need to start diversifying that and putting in a risk mitigation strategy in case something happens there. What are your thoughts about how that's changing?
It's basic risk management. So, if you have a concentration risk, you have to address it.
Yep.
So for business continuity planning processes, you have to have a strategy that says my material workloads are sitting on premises. If something breaks there, the whole system goes offline. So I need a BCP that allows me to switch over to my alternative strategy. That would be the same in an IT strategy. Yeah. So I believe you're right. I think there's only going to be more requirement from a regulatory perspective to think differently about different models to support core business operations.
Yeah. What do you see in the future for the industry that is now so highly connected and so distributed?
Supply chain presents such an interesting observation for technology as different technologies develop in the cloud. I think it's going to completely change the ball game in terms of what time to value you can get when you're building technology systems. And I guess where I think we're going to see a real impact is things like real-time pricing. So because you can get so much data so quickly using cloud technology, you're going to be able to price more efficiently for your customers, which is going to mean, a very different go-to-market strategy, a very different customer value proposition for what we're going to be able to do with supply chain and logistics operations going forward. I think also, if I think about the challenges we have, we were reflecting earlier about understanding how we're utilising our assets, thinking differently about warehouse management systems, transport management systems. They're completely going to change because we'll have the data using large language models and thinking differently about using data lakes to create solutions that allow us to track and monitor our assets much more effectively.
Yeah.
And then I think really it's often overlooked, but such an amazing advent of technology and cloud, which is really sitting behind that, which is the use of AI in operational efficiency.
Yeah.
So, you know, if I think about my own leadership team, we're all busily experimenting on Copilot now. We are using it in a really practical way that is solving productivity issues for our team. Yeah. So we are using it to summarize meetings where we previously would have spent hours going back and then writing an email. And it sounds like a very small thing, but in an industry like logistics and supply chain, incremental changes in productivity make a real difference to your ability to deliver to a customer.
Thank you, Anna. That was a lot of fun. Touched on some great topics today. We got to reflect on some good experiences. I really appreciate you joining us. Thanks so much.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today for episode 1 of the Nutanix Cloud Interlock series. We've got many more episodes coming in the future where we're going to be diving deeper into hybrid cloud use cases, cloud economics, issues around bimodal operations, and a lot more. So stay tuned, subscribe to the series, and look out for the next episode.